Welcome to Iraqi Dinar News, where you receive real and authentic updates about the Iraqi Dinar. If you want to stay informed with moment-by-moment developments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Now, let's move into today's discussion, which is based on circulating claims about potential fund disbursements, bond movements, and a possibly accelerated timeline for currency-related activity. This type of information tends to generate strong reactions within the Iraqi dinar community. So it's important that we approach it with a clear, analytical, and grounded perspective. The core of the report suggests that certain individuals are expecting to receive funds as early as Tuesday evening, with others scheduled for Wednesday. There is also mention of paymasters, bonds being processed, and a shortened timeline compared to earlier expectations. On the surface, this may sound like a significant development, especially for long-time followers of the Iraqi dinar. However, to properly understand what this means, we need to separate verifiable economic processes from informal or unconfirmed claims. First, let's address the idea of individuals receiving funds tied to bonds. In legitimate financial systems, bond transactions, whether sovereign bonds or private instruments, are handled through highly regulated channels. These processes involve banks, clearinghouses, and compliance frameworks that ensure transparency and legality. If large-scale bond redemptions or liquidity events were taking place at a national or international level, they would typically be reflected in official financial data, central bank statements, or market indicators. At present, there is no confirmed evidence from credible financial institutions or Iraq's central banking system indicating a sudden or secretive bond payout event that would trigger immediate downstream benefits for currency holders. This does not mean that financial activity is not happening in Iraq. It certainly is. But it does mean that extraordinary claims require careful scrutiny. The mention of paymasters is another element that requires context. In standard financial terminology, a paymaster is simply an entity responsible for distributing funds. However, in many online discussions about currency revaluation, this term is often used in a less formal and sometimes speculative way. Without clear identification of institutions, regulatory oversight, or transaction records, it becomes difficult to verify such claims. Now let's examine the timeline aspect. The narrative suggests that, historically, there was an expectation of a 10-day gap between bond-related events and currency holder access to banks. This is described as a plan from 20 years ago, which has now allegedly been condensed into a much shorter time frame due to concerns about confidentiality. From a financial systems perspective, timelines do evolve. Economic reforms, technological advancements, and geopolitical pressures can all influence how quickly financial processes are executed. Iraq, for example, has been working over the years to modernize its banking infrastructure, improve compliance with international standards, and stabilize its currency environment. These are real developments that can impact how financial operations are conducted. However, the idea that a decades-old plan involving synchronized global payouts would suddenly be compressed into a matter of hours or days raises important questions. Large-scale financial transitions, especially those involving national currencies, require coordination between central banks, international organizations, and financial markets. These processes are typically gradual, transparent, and communicated through official channels to maintain stability and avoid market disruption. The claim that events are being accelerated because they won't be able to keep things quiet also deserves careful consideration. In today's global financial system, secrecy on a large scale is extremely difficult to maintain, especially when it involves multiple institutions across different countries. At the same time, major financial decisions are not executed in secrecy for the benefit of select groups. they are implemented through structured policy changes that affect entire economies. For Iraqi dinar followers, the key question is, what does all of this mean for the currency itself? In the short term, unverified reports like these can create volatility in expectations, even if they do not affect the actual exchange rate. The Iraqi dinar remains a managed currency with its value, determined by the Central Bank of Iraq within a controlled framework. Any significant change in its valuation would likely be tied to broader economic indicators such as foreign reserves, oil revenues, inflation control, and structural reforms. Iraq's economy is heavily influenced by its oil sector, which provides the majority of government revenue. In recent years, there have been efforts to diversify the economy, strengthen the private sector, and improve fiscal management. These are the kinds of developments that can support long-term currency stability and potential appreciation. However, they operate on a macroeconomic level and are not triggered by isolated or informal financial events. In the long term, the outlook for the Iraqi dinar depends on sustained economic progress. This includes political stability, effective governance, and continued integration into the global financial system. International partnerships, adherence to anti-money laundering standards, and modernization of the banking sector all play a role in building confidence in the currency. It's also important to address the psychological aspect of these kinds of reports. After many years of anticipation, it's natural for investors and observers to feel hopeful when they hear about imminent timelines or insider information. However, maintaining a disciplined and evidence-based approach is essential. Financial decisions should be based on verified data, not on excitement or urgency. Another point worth noting is the distinction between liquidity events and currency revaluation. Even if, hypothetically, certain financial instruments were being processed or redeemed, that does not automatically translate into a change in the value of a national currency. Currency valuation is influenced by macroeconomic fundamentals, not by isolated transactions. The idea of a shotgun release, where events happen rapidly within hours, also contrasts with how central banks typically operate. Sudden, uncoordinated changes can lead to market instability, capital flight, and loss of confidence. For this reason, monetary authorities tend to implement changes in a controlled and well-communicated manner. For viewers who are closely following Iraqi dinar developments, the most reliable indicators to watch include official statements from the Central Bank of Iraq, updates from international financial institutions, and measurable economic data such as GDP growth, inflation rates, and foreign exchange reserves. These sources provide a factual basis for understanding where the currency is headed. It's also helpful to consider the broader regional and global context. Iraq's economy does not operate in isolation. It is influenced by global oil prices, geopolitical dynamics, and international trade relationships. Any significant shift in the dinar's value would likely be part of a broader economic strategy, not a sudden or isolated event. As we evaluate claims about specific dates, such as Tuesday evening or Wednesday fund disbursements, it's important to remember that financial systems do not typically operate on informal schedules shared through unofficial channels. Verified financial events are documented, regulated, and traceable. That said, the underlying sentiment that people are hopeful and watching closely is understandable. The Iraqi dinar has been a topic of interest for many years, and ongoing reforms in Iraq do provide a foundation for cautious optimism. The key is to balance that optimism with realism and a commitment to factual information. In summary, while the report suggests imminent activity involving funds, bonds, and accelerated timelines, there is currently no verified evidence from credible financial sources to support the idea of an immediate or secretive payout event linked to the Iraqi dinar. The claims should be viewed as unconfirmed and approached with caution. The short-term implication is that expectations may rise within the community, but the actual currency value is unlikely to be affected by such reports. The long-term outlook remains tied to Iraq's economic fundamentals and reform trajectory. As always, staying informed through reliable sources and maintaining a measured perspective is the best approach. The financial world is complex, and meaningful changes tend to be gradual, rather than sudden. Thank you for watching Iraqi Dinar News. If you want to continue receiving responsible and factual updates, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And as a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice.